we're back at the great temple to trains that is St Pancras station. Behind me, hopefully, is the yellow-billed Eurostar that's going to take Mrs Turtle and I on the first leg of another little adventure. Now, for family reasons, I need to be in Lisbon this weekend, and that's far too much of an opportunity to pass up for another challenge. Because just outside Lisbon is mainland Europe's most westerly point, Cabo da Roca, a high headland sticking out from Portugal's Atlantic coastline. The Romans called it Promontorium Magna, and medieval navigators knew it as the Rock of Lisbon. What better target for a 24-hour public transport challenge? At under 1,000 miles away, it's substantially closer to these buffer stops than the point in the far south of Italy that we reached from here in 24 hours a few years back. But our Iberian friends seem a bit allergic to running trains across national borders, so this will be a multimodal challenge, only possible in a few days when the uncoordinated timetables align. And if we needed another reason to head for Portugal right now, well, 50 years and a day ago, the Carnation Revolution took place, overthrowing the authoritarian Estado Novo government of the previous 41 years. It was a revolution whose start was signalled by the playing of Portugal's Eurovision entry, named for the seasonal flowers in the guns of the insurgent soldiers who took part in the coup, and remarkably, cost just 4 civilian lives. A fascinating moment to travel to a fascinating nation. Now, let's head to the Undercroft to check in for our first train and set our sights on the Atlantic. Expectant passengers mill in the old St Pancras beer cellars, then we're released up the escalators and back into the weak sunlight under the great sky blue barrel roof, skittering along the long platforms to find our seats on the 15:31 non-stop to Paris. I've barely an hour to get myself across the City of Light, so I'm delighted we're boarding on time. I'm starting my 24-hour clock at the moment we pull away, and our quarter-mile-long Eurostar starts to silently slide along the smooth rails 10 seconds early. At least on this challenge there's no complexity about the time zone at my destination, with Portugal, appropriately as Britain's alleged oldest ally, being the only mainland European nation to share our time zone. Though, of course, we do have the complexity of entering and leaving a Central European time along the way. Through the grimy windows, the liminal borderlands of London and Essex look still grimier today. It's the regular swing of a Eurostar journey out of St Pancras. The Thameside marshes, the QE2 bridge, the Medway, slicing past the mothballed international station at Ashford on our way to the tunnel. With a frequent traveller card, I've upgraded us to standard Premier for the princely sum of £1. It's 4 PM and they feel they need to feed us, but they're not really sure what meal time it is. The outcome are some pleasant arancini and a freezing cold red wine. When will I learn? Always have the white wine on Eurostar. 20 minutes of darkness flash by, and now the gentle countryside of northern France passes at 180 miles an hour. The journey is, as ever, enlivened by my fellow passengers. The Americans for whom the channel was perhaps not quite as exciting as they hoped, and the well-lubricated London ladies off for a weekend in Paris, describing in detail the intricate politics of the dog-walking groups of Belsize Park. Amidst the yellow fields of rape, the first apartment blocks of the Ile-de-France banlieue appear. Then we are slowing through Saint-Denis, past the double-deck commuter trains and into the shallow trench through which the myriad railways course into the Gare du Nord, Paris and Europe's busiest terminus station. It's only at about this point that I realise this normally highly punctual Eurostar is running a few minutes late, a realisation too late for me to work my way up to the front of the train for a speedy exit. So, at a few minutes before 7 PM local time, I'm leaping from our carriage and dodging the suitcase and child-wielding crowds on the narrow platform to head for the metro several hundred metres away. I've just over 3/4 of an hour to get to the Gare de Montparnasse, right over on the other side of town. The great thing about the Paris metro is it's so distinctively Parisian in its decor, its design and slight but pervasive smell that you feel like you've visited the French capital even if all you've done is race through its tunnels. The other great thing is just how close the stops are. It's 13 stops to Montparnasse. To a habitual London Underground user, that sounds a very long way. On the Paris metro, we're blitzing our way through them in no time. Indeed, two of the stops, Châtelet and Les Halles, are actually part of the same vast complex of metro and RER stations, and you can walk between them underground. By the time we get to Saint Placide, I can indeed be placid. We've made good time. The next stop is ours. I've often wondered why the metro station serving the Gare de Montparnasse appears to be called Montparnasse Welcome. Then, researching this journey, I noticed the tréma, that's an umlaut if you're of a Teutonic bent, over the U of Bienvenue. The second half of Montparnasse Bienvenue actually commemorates the wonderfully named civil engineer Fulgence Bienvenue, the so-called father of the metro. Montparnasse Bienvenue station is terribly situated for interchange with the mainline trains, but the efficiency of the metro means we have time to skip the 400-metre dreary subway and instead head up to street level to check we're actually in Paris. We do seem to be. Where I am walking should basically be the Gare de Montparnasse, but the whole thing was yanked southwards in 1969 to make way for a vast concrete shopping centre, now deserted except for a C&A, and the Tour Montparnasse, at the time France's tallest skyscraper and whose shadow famously acts as the gnomon of a sundial as it sweeps round the city. It was a brave move to shorten the railway lines into Montparnasse, given the pictorially famous event of 1895 at the old station. Montparnasse is a brutalist concrete bunker. It's not beautiful, but it reminds me of London Euston, where it's fashionable to bemoan the glories swept away, but the truth is those glories would never cope with modern passenger numbers. And tonight, Montparnasse needs all those concrete expanses. It's a Friday evening, so a decent portion of Paris's population is quitting the city for their second homes in the deep countryside or on the Atlantic coast. At every platform, a long south or westbound express, mainland timetabled only for the Friday exodus, waits for its load. Beneath the bare concrete struts, our high-speed steed south is hoovering up its weekenders. She is, in fact, two battle-worn double-deck TGVs coupled together. At Bordeaux, the rear half will split off and head southeast to Toulouse in Occitanie. Our portion at the front will continue southwest into Euskadi and to the Spanish border. Spot on time, with almost every seat taken and every spot of luggage space jammed full, the TGVs haul their heavy load out of the Montparnasse cave. The signs on the luggage racks exhorting us to voyager léger are roundly ignored in favour of bringing along the kitchen sink. We're up onto viaducts above the city avenues, overtaking pelotons of homeward-bound cycle commuters. There's a brief pause at the submarine-style suburban interchange station at Massy for the last few seats to receive their occupants, then we're on to cruise control, 500 kilometres non-stop southwest across the French hexagon towards Aquitaine. Racing down the ligne à grande vitesse Atlantique, through the flat fields of rapeseed, we swing past towns and cities at a respectful distance. Near Vendôme, we cross the river Loire, without an E. Confusingly, a few minutes later on the railway bypass of Tours, we cross the Loire, with an E. That's the one with the wine and the chateau. Then, as we fling ourselves along the Poitiers avoiding line, the driver, who is presumably a bit bored of a clear line ahead and a steady speed to maintain, comes on the PA to attempt to drum up some interest in the fact that we're travelling at 305 km an hour. No one bats an eyelid. After all, in 1990, the then rail speed record of 515 km an hour was set along this line. We're positively pedestrian. By comparison, when Jeanne comes on the PA a few minutes later to tell us there is still 50 minutes to Bordeaux and there's currently no queue at the bar, this provokes quite an exodus towards the buffet car. I'm sitting tight, however, with my provisions from Montparnasse. It's a holiday train, so it had to be an Orangina, and in honour of where I'm getting off this train, a Gâteau Basque Citron. Only a touch over 2 hours from Paris, and our high-speed cruise comes to an end under the great Gustave Eiffel-designed arched roof of Bordeaux Saint-Jean station. Appropriately, the station is twinned with St Pancras. Who knew you could twin railway stations? And the architectural similarities make it appropriate, even if a direct train between the two remains a distant pipe dream. Or tunnel dream, perhaps. With the train emptying in Bordeaux, it's time to venture to the buffet. I was just going to have a coffee. Then I was tempted by a jar of Loire Valley apple compote, which would at least have been local an hour ago. Then Jeanne, the bartender, points out to me that adding a brioche would only be 10 centimes more. Just like those poor peasants Marie Antoinette suggested brioche for, I don't know when Mrs. Turtle and I will get to eat again, so we tuck into quasi-dinner 3.0 as our shortened train races arrow straight across the sandy pitch-black lands of the Landes. We pull away from Dax, where they fight bulls and cure rheumatism, though not, I think, at the same time. The peaked-capped station master, duty done dispatching the train, returns to his office with a slight air of l'état c'est moi. Midnight, almost on the dot, and we're pricing ourselves off this comfy TGV at Bayonne in the French part of Euskadi, aka the Basque Country. The train continues from here through a few more Atlantic seaside resorts before terminating at the border at Ondaye. In an ideal world, we'd stay aboard and join a cosy sleeper to Portugal at the frontier where the track gauges change. But this is not an ideal world. The old Sud Express to Lisbon succumbed to COVID, so we need to take to the road now, and Bayonne is a better place to pick up a coach than little Ondaye. We're bustled out the station by Madame le Chef de Gare, eager to lock up after the last train has left, out onto the quiet streets of Friday night / Saturday morning Bayonne. Bayonne immediately feels fascinating. It sits on the strategic confluence of the rivers Adour and Nive as they race down from the Pyrenees, joining forces for the last few miles to the Atlantic. That strategic nature has attracted, so to speak, the English on several occasions. Richard the Lionheart nabbed the town in 1177, then the Duke of Wellington laid siege to it just before the conclusion of the Peninsular War in 1814. And the sleepy old town, full of 4- and 5-storey half-timbered buildings and the odd, slightly desultory late-night bar on its traffic-free streets, is an atmospheric place to wander while whiling away a few of the witching hours. But our time is soon up, and we're about to try something a little bit clever. Probably too clever. There's a coach to Lisbon, coming all the way from Luxembourg originally, which leaves Bayonne just as the TGV from Paris arrives, and which would get me to the Portuguese capital in time to complete the 24-hour challenge. It's a fast service because it slices straight across most of Spain, but it's a connection you wouldn't make. There's another Lisbon coach, coming from Paris, which leaves Bayonne at 1:30 a.m, giving plenty of time to connect off the midnight TGV. But it takes far too long to get to Lisbon because it makes a big diversion to serve Madrid en route. However, the faster coach makes a sizable diversion via Bilbao. The slower one doesn't, meaning it reaches the Basque capital of Vitoria-Gasteiz half an hour before the faster one does. Keeping up still? That means, theoretically, they can get the 1:30 a.m. coach as far as Vitoria, leap off there at 4 a.m, join the faster coach to Lisbon there at 4:30 a.m, and get to the banks of the Tagus at 1 p.m, just about in time to get to Cabo da Roca before the clock runs out. So that's why, as 1:30 a.m. approaches, I've walked back to an isolated but increasingly busy bus shelter on the banks of the Adour. This is the Quai de l'Essep, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because the great-grandfather of the guy who built the Suez Canal was a town clerk in Bayonne. And this is where it all starts to go wrong. Time ticks on. It turns out of the numerous people waiting at this far from palatial bus shelter, only one other is waiting for the same coach as me, a nervous French lady who has just completed her walk on the Camino de Santiago in the wrong direction. As a cold wind blows off the Adour and rats scuttle merrily on the quayside, 1:30 a.m. ticks past. The coach is operated by Alvia, a 101-year-old Spanish bus company now owned by National Express. The coach tracking on their website isn't working. No one picks up the phone when we ring them. Suddenly, several coaches emerge from the dark. Hope springs eternal. None of them is ours. Most of the other people at the stop embark for Paris. 2 a.m. passes. That half-hour connection at Vitoria looks very sketchy now. An Alza coach appears. It's the Lisbon to Paris opposite number. My fellow passenger optimistically asks the driver if he knows the whereabouts of his Portugal-bound counterpart. She just gets a laugh from him. The moon comes out from the clouds as many more minutes and half hours pass at this cheerless bus stop. Okay, so this is getting a little bit tedious. Bus is now 2 hours late and counting. Connection at Vitoria is definitely gone. We aren't getting to Cabo da Roca in 24 hours. Frankly, we're not getting there today. Lots and lots of alternative routes are fully booked. Just trying to find a way to get myself to Lisbon. And so the challenge basically becomes whether I can get to bed in Lisbon at the end of today. And even that is tricky. Iberia is not set up for the impulsive traveller. Nearly any coach or train going any distance needs to be reserved, and right now nearly every coach or train going the right way is full. I'm juggling the websites of about 10 operators on a smartphone at a French bus stop in the early hours, and my conclusion is, having found one Madrid to Lisbon coach with space this afternoon, that I need to get to the Spanish capital. So I find a train to get me there from San Sebastian, and I've just booked a Flixbus, which is tracking in on time, to get me there, when suddenly the Elsa bus appears, without explanation or apology, a mere 2.5 hours late. As we set off from Bayonne at last, the driver's mate explains to me that the website is correct. Beyond Vitoria, the coach is full, so I can't stay on to either Madrid or even Lisbon. Looks like we're off on a magical mystery tour into the heart of Euskadi. Heading west on motorways populated with little but heavy freight traffic, we cross, unseen in the dark, the river Bidasoa, taking us into Spain. The Bidasoa, just downstream, curves around Pheasant Island in Onday, which famously switches between being in France and Spain every 6 months. Which almost makes sense on a strange border like this, one where many local inhabitants, though perhaps more on the western side than the east, don't think the border should be there at all, in favour of a unified Basque nation. Twisting through the mountains, the dozing passengers adapt to the paradox of nighttime motorways, where the frequent tunnels are bright and the outside is dark. My first steps on the Spanish soil for many years are when we stopped to fill the coach's thirsty diesel tanks on the picturesquely named Inosti Industrial Dia. There's a derelict Chinese restaurant, the trucks roar ceaselessly past on the parallel motorway, half the coach ignores the petrol station's no smoking signs. I doze sporadically and wait to find the early grey dawn breaking on the damp suburban edge of Vitoria-Gasteiz, home of its vast, gleaming and rather empty bus station. The departure boards confirm that my fast BlaBlaCar bus to Lisbon has long since disappeared over the horizon. There's a coach boarding to Madrid with a spare seat, but with a long wait in the capital before I could move on to Lisbon. I've had enough of coaches for now. They'll feature quite a bit later, so instead I'm heading out in the light drizzle to the neighbouring tram stop. The damp horse chestnut blossom gently perfumes the air, a huge Basque flag hangs limply over some industrial architecture, and soon enough the first tram of the morning glides in over the lawns to take me to the centre of the Basque capital. Vitoria-Gasteiz has had a little modern tramway network since 2008, and frankly it still looks like it was built yesterday. With a handful of early morning Saturday commuters, we slide electrically along the avenues and into the nucleus of the old town. Basque is supposed to be a fiendishly hard language to understand, almost an orphan among European languages, but I reckon I could have guessed that Legabiltzara was the stop for the Parliament, even without the easy Spanish version above. This is very much a bilingual city, right down to the studious use of the dual city name everywhere. Vitoria in Spanish, Gasteiz in Basque. If this was Britain, we'd probably call it Hyphen City. The rain pours down on the lovely Plaza de la Virgen Blanca at the heart of the old town, where the over-the-top monument once again harks back to the Peninsular War and the Battle of Victoria, where Wellington nearly captured the puppet king of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte. And indeed, much of the city's eclectic architecture feels like it should be shaped around the fact it rains a lot here. The rain, in Spain it seems, falls mainly in the Basque autonomous community. The cathedral has porches you could park a double-deck bus in. The patrician houses around the square all have vast expanses of wooden bay windows, where we'd expect balconies further south. And a more contemporary concession to precipitation? Some of the steepest streets have covered moving walkways to both keep you dry and help you up the gradient on your way to the hilltop Pelota Court. Down on the arcaded Parliament Square, a fine collection of miniature municipal street cleaning machines buzz around. The past week was one of high drama here. Sunday's regional elections for the powerful Basque Parliament have produced a well-hung legislature, with both the incumbent centrist Nationalist Party and the left-leaning Nationalist Bildu Party, who in some people's eyes has historic ties to ETA, on 27 seats each, leaving the Spanish Socialist Party as kingmakers. But that's not disturbing the Sunday morning quiet here. There's time for a glance at the fantastic Lion's Head post boxes of Vitoria's main post office, and there's at last a cafe open to begin to re-warm my bones with an espresso con leche. Mrs. Turtle investigates the local speciality of panzinetta. She tells me it's a delicious custard-filled puff pastry, and I can't have any after putting her through a night like that. The first train to Madrid of the morning out of Vitoria-Gasteiz was fully booked, so I'm hanging around for the second, which had a handful of seats. That at least gives it a chance to stop raining, though the city's inhabitants have seen this trick before and are keeping their umbrellas up. But throwing caution to the wind, I can stroll to the station through the lovely and unsurprisingly lush parkland. And what a delight Vitoria's station is. A high, airy waiting hall illuminated by simple stained glass, long platforms stretching into the distance with period lamps, clocks and bells. Cheery staff mainly hanging around the station cafe because this is Spain and that means there aren't many trains and not much to do. Inevitably, if the heavily delayed Y-shaped Basque high-speed network is ever built, the whole station was shifted underground, as has happened in so many other Spanish cities, so I'll enjoy this atmospheric period piece while I can. But here, at last, is our transportation onward. A white and purple Alvia train, which is twisted through the mountains from San Sebastian and which will take us 360 kilometres to Madrid, half on slow conventional lines until we reach a high-speed axis and can race south to the capital. Rumbling gently beside the Zadorra River through the lands of Rioja, our train is paralleling the Camino de Santiago, that far older route west. Eventually we pass through the junction station at Miranda de Ebro and cross the eponymous river. We've just left Iscardi for Castile and suddenly all the signs are monolingual, as one would expect in the land of Castilian Spanish. Beyond Miranda, the scenery along the line becomes stunning. We pass dragon-toothed mountains, gorges, isolated villages and idyllic monasteries. It's some consolation to get to see this lovely corner of Spain in the daylight, even if it comes at the price of being 6 hours behind schedule. We are approaching Burgos, Franco's wartime capital and the heart of conservative, clerical central Spain. And this is where the meandering, gentle phase of this train journey abruptly ends. Here is where our Alvia train does something clever. Slowing to 15 km an hour, the train runs non-stop through an unstarved shed in the middle of nowhere. Noiselessly, the gauge of the train's wheel sets is narrowed by 233mm from the traditional broad Iberian gauge to the standard gauge used in most of the rest of Europe, and which Spain's immense high-speed network also uses. The gauge-changing apparatus is called a cambiador, hence the famous operatic chorus, "Cambiador, don't drop us on the floor." No? As we accelerate onto the high-speed line, the landscape changes again. We're slicing across an empty red-earthed plateau, through sunshine and rain, 900 metres up above sea level, as high as the summits of the highest Lake District fells. I take a trip up the train to the buffet car for more café con leche. A line of elderly men sit on the bar stools, wordlessly eating crisps and chorizo from paper plates as the empty heart of Spain races past behind them at 275 km per hour. Past Valladolid, and we're on an arrow straight shot towards Madrid, slicing through mile upon mile of serried ranks of stone pine trees, being commercially grown for the harvesting of pine nuts. It's like passing through an endless land of carefully laid out broccoli florets, standing on their end and casting circular shade from the emerging sun. Beyond the land of the stone pines, we're back into a bare rolling plateau, above which the vast bulk and dome of Segovia Cathedral floats, as though standing isolated in the middle of the prairie-like fields. Once this was being built in the mid-16th century, its style was pretty archaic, and this was the last major Gothic cathedral built in mainland Europe. Leaving the cathedral behind, the train plunges into a 28-kilometre long base tunnel under the Sierra de Guadarrama, the world's 5th longest rail tunnel. Back into daylight, there's a glimpse of the wild windswept highlands of the Sierra, before another 9 kilometres underground suddenly brings us out amid the high-rise blocks of the Madrid satellite towns. And so, 1 minute early, we arrive at the red platforms of the vast 1970s terminus of Madrid-Chamartín. Our little train from the northeast gets relegated to the far end of the platforms, while the three competing operators for the lucrative routes to the south coast get the prime position up by the buffer stops. Chamartín is to the far north of Madrid's vast city centre. The bus station is to the far south, and we don't have too long to get there. Luckily, long-distance train tickets in Spain include a free journey on the suburban Cercanías trains, and even better, it's now a case of just scanning the QR code on your ticket on the Cercanías gates, rather than fighting a ticket machine. It would be helpful if they told you which of the many platforms your suburban train will leave from more than 1 minute before departure, but the trains are frequent and we work it out. Within a few minutes, we're heading efficiently through the tunnels under the city centre to emerge blinking at the bustling Atocha terminus. Well, we couldn't come to Madrid without coming and seeing the famous Botanic Garden that's now in the former train shed of Atocha station. The trains have been moved to a new concourse out further out to the front. Unfortunately though, the useful trains run out again here, so we need to head on south to the bus station. Sadly, the Atocha Botanic Garden no longer has its once famous terrapin pool, so no friendly visit for Mrs. Turtle today. It's just a short hop to the south bus station, a vast edifice that befits a nation that prefers coach to rail. Unfortunately, French State Railway spin-off BlaBlaCar, the only people with spare seats to Lisbon today, don't seem to want to pay to use most of the facilities. There's no sign of their coach on the departure boards, and it's by chance that I find an inconspicuous A4 sheet of paper on the wall with the number of the gate. With minutes ticking away, luck strikes again when an uninterested employee appears at the deserted gate and points me to the coach standing a couple more gates further down. I'm relieved to be in my reserved front seat, perched above the chatty driver, 1 minute before the non-stop Lisbon bus pulls away into the labyrinth of bus station tunnels and soon out onto the Autovia, heading west.
Tenho lugar atribuído.
There's a rich mix of travellers on this bus, which has also come from Paris. Budget French tourists on a 24-hour coach journey to Lisbon. I mean, who would do that? LOL. Portuguese diaspora visiting home from Switzerland and Germany. Migrant workers from North Africa returning to Portugal. The cycles of economic migration turning like the wheels of our coach. Astonishingly, there's no meaningful rail connection between the neighbouring capitals of Madrid and Lisbon, though the first bits of a high-speed link will start coming into service in the next few years. For now, it's plane or coach, so it's no surprise every bus on this run today is pretty much fully booked. Out amid the vast plains of La Mancha, the ramparts of Maqueda Castle stand guard over the motorway. Maqueda is pretty clearly a name of Arabic extraction, so it's no surprise this fortification was originally built by the Moors. On a particularly nondescript bit of the A5 motorway, on a deeply nondescript bit of plain, as we pass the Castilian village of Santa Olalla, our 24 hours from St Pancras runs out. We've travelled 820 miles as the crow flies, but we're a long, long way from Cabo da Roca yet. While our driver shovels away fruit, 2 bags of grapes and 3 bananas since Madrid, I doze a little and wake up to find something surprising has happened. The scenery got interesting. Having not planned to come this way, I've done little research, so finding ourselves in the beautiful wilderness of Extremadura is a bit of a shock. There's a good sign that we're making progress as we cross the wide, muddy Rio Tejo. When it crosses the border, we'll swap the E for an A and become the Tajo, or Tagus to Anglophones, the estuary on which Lisbon sits. As we pass the halfway point of our 5.5-hour journey, we climb up and under the Monfrag Mountains, apparently home to every type of vulture you've ever heard of. With impeccable timing, something swoops in to sweep up roadkill right in front of the coach. 25 minutes for dinner, comes the shout as we pull off the Merida bypass. Sometimes coach travel resembles the early days of the railways before corridors, dining cars and upper-crust sandwich outlets. We've stopped at a joyously old-school cafeteria with a frankly impressive-looking menu. However, given how hassled the staff are with two competing coaches disgorging simultaneously, I opt for a straightforward and surprisingly succulent Spanish tortilla baguette. The Yorkshireman in me appreciates the cultural nod to the chip butty. Not too long after we roll off again and we're passing Badajoz, Iberia's answer to Berwick-upon-Tweed, having switched hands between Spain and Portugal almost incessantly. It seems settled in Spain now and we finally cross the Portuguese border just beyond. I'm delighted. Journey's end for today is in sight. I'm delighted because I love Portugal's trees. They are mostly old and gnarly and somehow seem like storytellers. And our driver is delighted because once over the border, he can tune his radio to catch the end of Benfica beating Braga 3-1. The whole coach is suffused with that same feeling of relief and imminent release as we race towards the Atlantic sunset and the coastal plain. We're approaching the twinkling lights of Lisbon over the Ponte Vasco da Gama, one of two bridges across the Tagus in Lisbon and by far the longest, curving across a very wide basin known as the Mar de Palha. In fact, at over 12 kilometres long, Vasco da Gama is the second longest bridge in Europe, beaten only by the Kerch Bridge over the Crimean Strait, and frankly, Lisbon feels safer right now.
Vossos pertences e de levar o respectivo lixo. Obrigado. Boa noite a todos.
Well, good evening from Oriente bus station here in Lisbon. My bus from Madrid just arrived half an hour early. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that we are 6 hours after our 24-hour deadline. Obviously, this all went slightly wrong, but very much hope you've enjoyed coming along with me. I've had a fantastic time despite the many hours spent in a freezing cold riverside in Bayonne. But we've seen some interesting places and some interesting people, some great countryside, even some decent food in a few places. So thank you ever so much for coming along. From myself and from Mrs. Turtle, we tried to get you to Cabo da Roca in 24 hours from St Pancras, but unfortunately didn't quite manage it. But from us, buona notte. Well, we couldn't let that be the end of the story, quite, could we? We couldn't come all this way and not at least be able to boast that we've got to the most westerly point in mainland Europe entirely by public transport. So it's the next day. I've come back across the river by ferry from the south bank where my relatives live, and we're going to pick up those final few miles now, even if we are a long way outside the 24 hours that we promised. Behind me, spanning the Tagus, is the bridge to 25th April. That memorialises the date of the Carnation Revolution 50 years ago this year. The original name of this huge suspension bridge was the Ponte Salazar, named after the longest serving Prime Minister of the Estado Novo regime. The change in the name, and in fact the physical change in the name, the removal of the large steel letters spelling out the name, became one of the iconic moments of that revolution. So let's head a few metres inland, pick up a train and start our journey to Cabo da Roca, the most westerly point in mainland Europe. This section of the Tagus waterfront, Cais do Sodré, has a nice party air to it on a sunny April Sunday, but it's also a serious multimodal interchange between ferries, buses, trams, metro and, most importantly for us, the terminus of the Cascais railway line. This line, linking suburbs and xixi resorts along the north bank of the estuary, is practically isolated from the rest of Portugal's rail network. It was the first bit of Portuguese railway to be electrified and still runs at a different voltage to the nation's other lines. There's a pleasingly archaic air to the line's trains, and I love that, as well as the usual bicycle sign by some of their doors, these stainless steel beauties also carry another locally appropriate pictogram. These are the trains to the Atlantic breakers. In an unknown phenomenon, weekend engineering works are finished early, and the rail replacement bus for part of the journey is now, well, a train. As commuter railways go, the Cascais line is a wonderful one, quickly shaking off the industrial port and its trendy warehouses turned nightclubs, under the 25th of April bridge and along the Tagus, overtaking sailing boats and promenading Lisboans. Sit on the left and you get a whistle-stop tour of some of Lisbon's outer sights. First, the Padral dos Descumprimentos, the monument to Portuguese navigators, very Salazar-esque in its uncomplicated romanticisation of the age. Then a brief glimpse of the Torre de Belém, the ceremonial tower built as a point for the ceremonial welcome home of said explorers, though of course our destination, the Rock of Lisbon, would have been their first sight of the Lusitanian coast. It's so lovely to glide electrically and efficiently along beside the shining waters, acknowledging the waves of the promenaders and the cyclists, past villas and the odd palm tree. At Estoril and Monte Estoril stations, now beside the ocean itself, we're at the heart of the Portuguese Riviera, one of the most expensive places to live in the country, the neutral World War II bolt hole of the erstwhile Edward VIII, and Antonio Salazar's summer home. Not far beyond, and we're at Cascais, ends this short 40-minute shuttle. Cascais has all the same aristocratic entanglements as Estoril, plus a guest appearance by the exiled Cuban military dictator Batista after his overthrow by Fidel Castro. Cascais, I know from previous visits, is lovely, but the connection to the bus, I'm not really sure if it's meant to be a connection honestly, is a tight one, so we're missing those delights in favour of the gloomy bus station hidden over the road. Happily, things get a lot less blue inside the 1624 bus to Portela de Sintra once it gets out of the Stygian depths of the bus station, passing the tsunami evacuation route signs that pepper the town. Cascais' palm-lined streets spool on and on up the hill, broad security guards pacing the warm pavements outside shuttered villas. But then, suddenly, our canary yellow bus is free, climbing the scrubby slopes, saw-toothed mountain ridges close at hand. As semi-urban bus routes with a half-hourly service go, the 1624 is definitely up there for spectacular scenery. In the little whitewashed village of Alvia, we turn left off the main road for the final few kilometres west, signs pointing us to the lighthouse at the end of Europe. It's a narrow road, but we speed along it, heading further out onto the headland, the Atlantic on both sides of us now, far, far below. And this, right here, just below the so archetypal it hurts red lighthouse, is mainland Europe's most westerly bus stop. With it to 6 well-patronised yellow buses an hour squeezing down the road to it, I strongly suspect that, of the continent's cardinal bus stops, this is by some distance the busiest. And just a few steps away, across a lovely, wind-swept, wildflower-strewn heathland, along a well-walked trail, is the tall cross on the headland of Cabo da Roca, the most westerly point in mainland Europe, graced by the most westerly crocheted turtle in mainland Europe, just a few hours behind schedule. So for a moment or so I am the most westerly person in continental Europe, and this is the most westerly crocheted turtle in continental Europe. Got here eventually, far beyond the time expected, but at least I can say we got from St Pancras all the way to Cabo da Roca, the most westerly point of mainland Europe, by public transport. 5 trains, 2 coaches, 1 bus, a metro, It's been exhausting at times and freezing, but it has been great fun. And I'm sure there'll be plenty more adventures where this one comes from. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it along as much as I have, and from Mrs. Turtle and myself, this really is the end of the video. Bye bye.
Camaradas, viva a República! Viva o socialismo! Viva Portugal!